The spotlight hit Tony Bennett's face as he walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage for what everyone believed would be just another magical evening. The 96-year-old legend moved with careful grace, each step deliberate, his signature black tuxedo immaculate under the golden lights. The audience of 2,104 people rose to their feet before he even reached the microphone, their applause thundering through the historic venue like a tidal wave of love and reverence. But when he reached for the vintage Neumann microphone, opened his mouth to sing, "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," nothing came out. Not because his legendary voice had failed him, but because someone had deliberately cut the sound. The silence that followed was deafening. Tony tapped the microphone, his weathered hands trembling slightly, confusion flickering across his expressive face. Behind the ornate curtains, the technical crew scrambled frantically, their headsets crackling with urgent whispers. "Check all the connections," the sound engineer hissed into his radio, sweat beading on his forehead. This has never happened before, never. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't a technical malfunction. This was revenge, 40 years in the making, meticulously planned and executed with surgical precision. In the wings, hidden behind a forest of cables and equipment, stood Marcus Rivera, the man Tony had forgotten, but who had never forgotten Tony. At 67, Marcus still possessed the lean build of a jazz vocalist, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his dark eyes burning with decades of suppressed rage. He smiled as he held the small electronic device that controlled the venue's entire sound system. One click had silenced the greatest voice in American music, but this was just the beginning of his elaborate plan. The audience began to murmur, confusion rippling through the rows like stones thrown into still water. Cell phones emerged from designer purses and jacket pockets, their screens glowing in the darkened hall as people began recording what they assumed would become a legendary technical mishap. Tony Bennett, the man who had performed flawlessly for 7 decades, stood helpless on stage, his vulnerability exposed under the merciless spotlight. From the front row, Susan Bennett watched her husband with a breaking heart. At 56, she had been Tony's anchor for nearly 4 decades, seeing him through triumphs and trials that would have broken lesser men. She had witnessed Tony overcome everything, from hand-to-hand combat in the trenches of World War II to the suffocating depths of cocaine addiction in the 1970s, from nearly losing his career during the disco era to his miraculous comeback in the 1990s. But she had never seen him look so vulnerable, so achingly small, beneath the vast cathedral ceiling of Carnegie Hall. But then something extraordinary happened, something that would be talked about for generations. Tony Bennett did what he had done his entire life when faced with adversity. He adapted, he improvised, he found a way. Without amplification, without the safety net of technology, he began to sing anyway. His voice, though weakened by age and the early stages of Alzheimer's that he fought daily, carried the pure, distilled emotion that had made him legendary. It was raw, unfiltered, utterly human. The massive hall fell silent as his unamplified voice reached the first few rows. The loveliness of Paris seemed somehow sadly gay. The glory that was Rome is of another day. One by one, people in the audience began to stand, not in a standing ovation, but moving closer to the stage with an urgency that surprised even themselves. Row by row, they pressed forward, straining to catch every precious note floating through the air. Concert etiquette dissolved as hundreds of elegantly dressed patrons abandoned their expensive seats, drawn like moths to the flame of Bennett's naked vulnerability. The ushers, resplendent in their Carnegie Hall uniforms, gave up trying to maintain order. This wasn't a concert anymore. It was something sacred, something unprecedented in the venue's 132-year history. Marcus Rivera's satisfied smile began to fade. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The plan had been perfect. Humiliate Tony Bennett on the most important night of his farewell tour. Expose him as a frail old man whose time had passed. Destroy the myth and leave only the broken reality behind. Instead, the old man was creating something more intimate and powerful than any amplified performance could have been. The revenge that Marcus had planned for 4 decades was backfiring spectacularly. But wait, there's something you need to know about Marcus Rivera, something that makes this betrayal even more devastating. In the 3rd row, a young woman with tears streaming down her face began to sing along softly. Her name was Rebecca Chen, a 28-year-old nurse from Queens whose grandmother had played Tony. Bennett records every Sunday morning after church. Rebecca knew every word, every inflection, every breath. Her voice, clear and sweet, began to weave itself into Tony's weathered melody. Soon others joined her. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a surgeon who had saved countless lives with hands that now trembled as she sang. James Thompson, a 45-year-old construction worker who had spent his last paycheck on this ticket for his deceased mother's birthday. Maria Santos, an 82-year-old widow who had danced to Tony's music at her wedding 60 years ago. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were participating in something magical, something that transcended performance and entered the realm of communal prayer. But Marcus couldn't let it end like this. He had waited too long, sacrificed too much. The memory burned in his mind like acid. 1983, backstage at the Blue Note in Greenwich Village. Tony Bennett, riding high on his comeback, had listened to Marcus sing and said those words that had changed everything. "Kid, you've got something special, real special. Give me your number. I'm going to make some calls." They had shaken hands on it. Marcus remembered the strength in Tony's grip, the sincerity in his eyes, the promise that seemed as solid as steel. Marcus had quit his day job as a music teacher the next morning, turned down a steady gig at a casino in Atlantic City, even broke up with his fiancée who begged him not to throw away his stable life for a maybe. The call never came. For 6 months, Marcus had waited by his phone like a lovesick teenager. He had practiced scales until his throat bled, written new arrangements, even bought a new suit for the recording session that never materialized. Meanwhile, Tony Bennett went on to have one of the greatest comebacks in music history. MTV Unplugged, duets with every major artist of the era, Grammy after Grammy. While Marcus's dreams died slowly in a series of empty nightclub performances in Newark and the Bronx. The bitterness had eaten away at him for 40 years, transforming a talented young man into something harder, colder. Marcus had become successful in his own right, a music producer, a vocal coach to the stars, but the wound never healed. Every time he heard Tony Bennett's voice on the radio, every time he saw another tribute or award ceremony, the rage grew stronger. And now, finally, he could make Tony Bennett feel what he had felt: abandoned, forgotten, helpless. Marcus pulled out his phone and made another call. Cut the main power, all of it, now. The stage lights went black. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ornate walls and frescoed ceiling. But Tony Bennett kept singing. In the darkness, his voice seemed to grow stronger, more haunting, as if the absence of light had somehow freed him from the weight of expectation. The audience, now unable to see him clearly, focused entirely on the sound. His voice filled the void like incense, creating an intimacy where technology had failed. In that moment, Carnegie Hall became what it was meant to be. Not a showcase for technical perfection, but a sacred space where human souls connected across the artificial barriers of stage and seat. Susan Bennett knew something was wrong. This wasn't just technical difficulties, not in a venue as prestigious as Carnegie Hall, not with backup systems and redundant power supplies. She signaled to Tony's security detail, led by Frank Morrison, a former NYPD detective who had protected Tony for 15 years. But even Frank looked confused, his hand moving instinctively toward the service weapon he still carried out of habit. From somewhere in the upper balcony, another voice joined Tony's. Clear, strong, and eerily familiar, it floated down like a ghost from the past. The voice belonged to Elena Vasquez, now 89 years old, who had been Tony's duet partner in a small Greenwich Village club in 1962, back when they were both young and hungry and full of dreams that seemed too big for their small stage. Elena had loved Tony then with the fierce, desperate love of youth that believes it can overcome any obstacle. It was before his first marriage to Patricia Beach, before the children and the fame and the inevitable complications that success brings to every relationship. They had sung together 3 nights a week for 8 months, their voices blending as naturally as breathing, their eyes meeting across the microphone in moments of perfect harmony that felt like glimpses of eternity. But Elena had been in the audience that night, not by coincidence. She too had received an anonymous message, delivered to her apartment in Washington Heights by a courier who disappeared before she could ask questions. "Come to Carnegie Hall tonight. Tony needs you. Balcony seat 47B. Come alone." She didn't know who had sent it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the paper expensive but unmarked. But after 61 years, she still couldn't resist anything involving Tony Bennett, the man who had broken her heart so gently that she had thanked him for it, who had taught her that some loves are too pure to survive the compromises that reality demands. Their voices intertwined in the darkness now, just as they had 6 decades earlier in that cramped club where dreams were born and died nightly. The audience was witnessing something that no one had planned, no one had rehearsed, and no one would ever be able to recreate. 2 voices that had found each other across time, singing without microphones, without lights, without anything but the raw, pure emotion that had drawn them together when the world was young. Marcus Rivera stood frozen in the wings. He had orchestrated this entire evening with the precision of a military operation. He had spent months learning about Carnegie Hall's technical systems, had hacked into their sound equipment during a previous event, had bribed the building's electrical contractor to provide him with override codes, and had even arranged for several key technical crew members to mysteriously call in sick, leaving skeleton crews who would be too overwhelmed to quickly diagnose the problems. But he hadn't planned for this. He certainly hadn't planned for Elena. As Tony and Elena's impromptu duet reached its crescendo, something inside Marcus broke. The man on stage wasn't the bitter, successful performer who had allegedly betrayed him. This was a 96-year-old human being giving everything he had left to an audience sitting in darkness, sharing his vulnerability as a gift. This was pure artistry, stripped of everything but love for the music and respect for the people who had come to hear it. This wasn't the monster Marcus had constructed in his mind over 4 decades of nursing his wounds. This was just a man, old, fragile, doing his best with what remained of his once magnificent instrument. For the first time in 40 years, Marcus, Rivera remembered why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. He made a second phone call, his voice barely a whisper. Restore the power. Now. Everything. The lights came back gradually, like dawn breaking over a sleeping city. The sound system hummed to life with a gentle electronic purr. Tony Bennett stood center stage, now with Elena beside him. Somehow she had made her way down from the balcony during the blackout, guided by ushers who understood that this was bigger than rules or protocol. Both singers were breathing heavily but smiling, their faces glowing with the kind of joy that only comes from sharing something perfect with people you love. The audience erupted in the longest standing ovation in Carnegie Hall's history. But Tony held up his hand for silence, his gesture carrying the authority of 7 decades in show business. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice now amplified and strong, "sometimes the most beautiful music happens when everything else goes wrong. Tonight, you've given me and Elena a gift I'll never forget. You've reminded me what this is all about. Not the lights, not the technology, not even the perfect acoustics of this magnificent hall. It's about the connection between one human heart and another, carried on the wings of song." He paused, scanning the audience until his eyes found the exact spot where Marcus was still standing in the wings, hidden in shadows. "But there's someone else here tonight who needs to hear this song. Someone who's been carrying a burden for far too long." Tony looked directly into the wings where Marcus Rivera was still standing, his sophisticated sabotage equipment scattered around him, like the toys of a child who had lost interest in playing. "Marcus Rivera, I know you're there. I know you've been there all along, and I know why you're here." Marcus felt his legs go weak. How? How could Tony possibly know? 40 years ago, Tony continued, his voice carrying clearly, through the hall's perfect acoustics, I made a young man a promise I didn't keep. I was riding high on success, drunk on my own comeback, and I thought I was too important to remember the little people who believed in me. I was young, scared, and stupid. I thought success was a zero-sum game, that there wasn't enough room for all of us at the top. I was wrong. I was so very wrong. Marcus Rivera stepped out of the shadows on unsteady legs, tears streaming down his face for the first time since his mother's funeral. The electronic device that had controlled the sound system fell from his hands and clattered across the stage floor, its screens going dark. "I came here to destroy you," Marcus whispered, though the sensitive microphones caught every word and sent it to the far corners of the hall, where 4 people held their collective breath. "I know," Tony said gently, his voice carrying all the warmth and understanding that had made him beloved by generations of fans, "and maybe I deserved it. Maybe I needed to be reminded of the promises I broke, the dreams I ignored, the people I forgot in my rush to secure my own future. But look around, Marcus. Look what we created instead." The audience watched in stunned silence as Tony Bennett, the last of the great American crooners, walked slowly across the stage to Marcus Rivera, the man who had tried to destroy him, and embraced him like a lost brother. "Sing with us," Tony said, his voice breaking slightly. "It's not too late. It's never too late to make music together." And so, on that October night in 2023, 3 voices that had been separated by time, betrayal, and pride joined together in an unrehearsed, unplanned, and unforgettable performance of "The Way You Look Tonight." The song they had all learned from different teachers in different decades for different reasons now became a bridge across the chasms that life had carved between them. The audience didn't just witness a concert, they witnessed forgiveness, redemption, and the power of music to heal wounds that had festered for decades. They watched three human beings discover that the things that divide us are often smaller than the things that unite us, and that it's never too late to choose love over hate, creation over destruction, harmony over discord. The video, recorded on dozens of phones by audience members who understood they were witnessing history, would become viral within hours. Not because of the technical failures or the dramatic revelations, but because people around the world watched three human beings discover that it's never too late to make things right. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months later, Marcus Rivera released his first album in 40 years. It was produced by Tony Bennett, who insisted that Marcus receive top billing. The title track was Never Too Late, written by Elena Vasquez and performed by all three voices that had found each other again in the darkness of Carnegie Hall. The album debuted at #1 on the jazz charts and earned Marcus his first Grammy nomination. Elena Vasquez, inspired by her unexpected return to the stage, began performing again at small venues in New York. At 89, her voice carried a lifetime of experience and wisdom that younger singers could only dream of achieving. She often said in interviews that the blackout at Carnegie Hall had been the brightest moment of her life. Tony Bennett passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months after that concert, with Susan holding his hand, and Sinatra playing softly on the stereo in their Central Park West apartment. At his funeral, held at St. Patrick's Cathedral, Marcus Rivera and Elena Vasquez sang I Left My Heart in San Francisco, without microphones, just as they had that magical night. And everyone who had been there, all 2,804 witnesses to forgiveness, knew that Tony Bennett had left his heart not just in San Francisco, but in Carnegie Hall, where love had conquered. Revenge and music had healed a 40-year-old wound. The last song had become the first song of something beautiful and new. A reminder that in a world full of division and anger, sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to extend their hand in forgiveness to change everything. Tony Bennett's final gift wasn't just his music, but his demonstration that the human heart, like a great song, never truly goes out of style. Marcus Rivera still performs regularly, often dedicating his shows to the man who taught me that it's never too late to start over. Elena Vasquez continues to sing in small clubs around New York, her voice a living link to the golden age of American song. And somewhere in the archives of 1,000 phones, that night in Carnegie Hall lives on. A testament to the power of music to transform not just performers, but everyone lucky enough to witness the magic when it happens. The lights of Carnegie Hall have dimmed on countless performances over the decades, but some nights burn brighter than others. Some nights become legends. And some nights, when everything goes wrong, everything finally goes right. But there was one more secret that night, one final twist that even Marcus Rivera didn't know he had orchestrated. In the audience, sitting in seat C14, was David Chen, Rebecca's younger brother and a sound engineering student at Juilliard. When the power had been cut, David's training kicked in. He began recording everything on his high-end portable equipment, capturing not just the voices but the ambient sounds. The rustling of fabric as people moved closer, the quiet sobs of emotion, the barely audible whispers of recognition and awe. That recording, crystalline in its clarity and profound in its emotional depth, would become the most bootlegged concert recording in history. But more than that, it would serve as the foundation for a documentary film that would win the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature 2 years later. The last song, When Music Saved the Night, would introduce Tony Bennett's story to a whole new generation, proving that great art transcends the technology that presents it. The documentary revealed details that the audience that night never knew. The cameras showed Marcus Rivera's elaborate preparation, the months of planning, the technical reconnaissance, the careful choreography of sabotage. But it also showed the aftermath. Marcus breaking down in his hotel room after the concert, calling his ex-fiancée, now married with 3 children, to apologize for disappearing 40 years earlier, donating his entire fee from his comeback album to music education programs for underprivileged children. Elena Vasquez, interviewed for the film in her small Washington Heights apartment surrounded by photographs and sheet music, revealed her own secret. She had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 3 months before that Carnegie Hall concert. "I thought it would be the last time I'd ever sing in public," she said, her voice still strong despite her 91 years. "I went to say goodbye to music. Instead, I found it again." The documentary also captured something else, the ripple effects of that single night. Rebecca Chen quit her job as a nurse and enrolled in music therapy school, eventually founding a program that brought live music to Alzheimer's patients. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell began organizing medical conferences where healing through music was a central theme. James Thompson started a foundation that provided concert tickets to working-class families who couldn't otherwise afford them. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt by the technical crew, who had been baffled by the equipment failures that night. When they learned months later what had really happened instead of anger, they felt a strange kind of pride. They had witnessed something that their technical perfection never could have created. Sound engineer Mike Rodriguez, 22, years at Carnegie Hall, put it best. "All these years, I thought my job was to make sure nothing went wrong. That night, I learned that sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when everything goes wrong." The story became a Harvard Business School case study about crisis management and human grace under pressure. It became a sociology paper about collective behavior and spontaneous community. It became a musicology dissertation about the relationship between technology and authentic human expression. But for Susan Bennett, watching the documentary in the living room of the apartment she had shared with Tony, it was simply a reminder of why she had fallen in love with him 50 years earlier. "People always ask me what it was like being married to a legend," she said in her own interview. "But Tony was never a legend to me. He was just a man who believed that music could make everything better. And you know what? He was right." The final scene of the documentary shows Carnegie Hall on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, empty except for a lone janitor sweeping the stage. As he works, he hums, "I left my heart in San Francisco," softly to himself. Not because it's a famous song, but because it's the song he can't get out of his head after hearing it sung that way, on that night, by those 3 voices that found each other in the darkness. The camera lingers on the spot where Tony Bennett stood that night, where his voice filled the void when technology failed, where forgiveness triumphed over revenge, where 3 broken hearts found a way to beat in harmony again. And in that lingering shot, you can almost hear it still, the echo of something perfect, something unplanned, something that proved that the most advanced sound system in the world is no match for the simple human voice raised in song. The last song had become eternal, its memory preserved not just in recordings, but in the lives it changed, the careers it launched, the forgiveness it inspired. Tony Bennett's final gift wasn't just his music. It was his reminder that in a world increasingly dependent on technology, sometimes the most profound moments happen when all the sophisticated equipment fails and we're left with nothing but our voices, our hearts, and our capacity to surprise ourselves with grace. In the end, Marcus Rivera got his revenge. But it wasn't the revenge he had planned. Instead of destroying Tony Bennett, he had helped him create his most beautiful moment. A reminder that even legends are just people, doing their best with what they have, hoping that when their voice is heard, it carries a little bit of love into the darkness where we're all stumbling around, looking for the light. Years later, when music students study that night, they learn about more than mere technique. They learn about courage, forgiveness, and that technology can never replace one heart speaking to another in song. The last song never really ends. It waits for the next voice, brave enough to carry it forward,